Imagine a surface that melts lead during the day and freezes carbon dioxide at night. A place where the sun appears 3 times larger in the sky, burning everything with the force of 7 Earth suns combined. A planet with no atmosphere to protect us, no magnetic field to shelter us, not a single drop of liquid water to sustain us. A world that seems to have been forged in the fires of hell to cruelly remind us of our absolute limits. Mercury's craters hold stories of billions of years of merciless cosmic bombardment, its surface, scarred like an eternal battlefield between meteorites and time, whispers a terrible truth through the vacuum. Nothing we know as life could ever flourish here. Not resilient plants, not adaptable animals, not even us, the tireless dreamers of the human species. During the Mercurian day, which stretches for 88 Earth days, the surface temperature reaches 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt zinc and tin like butter. The heat isn't just intense, it's a living force that distorts space itself, creating mirages that dance like metallic ghosts over plains of molten iron. But when night arrives, bringing with it another 88 days of absolute darkness, Mercury transforms into a frozen mausoleum. The temperature plummets too, and in the midst of this cosmic dance between fire and ice, there is a thin line, the twilight zone, where day meets night in a delicate waltz of almost bearable temperatures. A narrow strip where, for a few precious moments, the surface is neither melting nor freezing, just existing in an impossible pause between deadly extremes. It is on this border that the first possibilities whisper. It is on this fine line between worlds that the question that defies all logic is born. What if, instead of just observing Mercury through telescopes as an astronomical curiosity, we decided to call it home? What if the impossible was just a challenge in disguise? The story you are about to hear isn't about military conquest or technological domination. It's about spiritual metamorphosis. It's not about beating Mercury through brute force. It's about allowing ourselves to be molded by it, transformed by it, until the line between terrestrial humanity and Mercurian existence dissolves forever in a cosmic alchemy. Because maybe the real question isn't, can we survive on Mercury, but rather, would we still be recognizable as human after trying? And maybe that's exactly the adventure our soul has been waiting for. Since we first looked at the stars, the planet closest to the sun is calling, and against all scientific reason, some hearts are already answering. If this kind of content speaks to your imagination and faith, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves exploring the mysteries of the universe. The first generation of Mercurian colonists didn't inhabit Mercury. They inhabited their own mobile technological cocoons. Each survival unit was a masterpiece of extreme bioengineering, smart fabric that breathed in harmony with the human body, carbon nanotubes that distributed temperature like an artificial circulatory system, self-repairing fibers that mended themselves with every micrometeorite impact as if they were regenerating living cells. They weren't just protective suits, they were living cocoons, organic extensions of human skin itself, a second layer of existence that turned each person into a hybrid creature. The Mercurian suit had 7 vital, interdependent layers. The first, a bioresponsive conductive gel that kept the body temperature strictly constant, even when the external environment varied. The fourth layer was an atmospheric filtration system that extracted oxygen directly from the oxidized minerals in the Mercurian soil, turning every step into a breath, every movement into an inhalation. The fifth, tactile sensors that translated the hostile surface into understandable textures, turning molten metal into soft, carbon dioxide ice into rough. The sixth, emotional processors that monitored the user's psychological state, injecting synthetic endorphins when reality became psychologically unbearable. And the seventh, The most important was the neural interface that connected not only body and suit, but connected each colonist to the others, creating a network of consciousnesses that thought together, felt together, and survived together. Inside them, the colonists breathed through chemical filters that extracted oxygen from the sulfuric compounds in the thin air. Their eyes saw through visors that translated the devastating solar spectrum into colors understandable to human retinas. Their voices echoed through communicators that transformed laryngeal vibrations into digital words that traveled through the heat waves. But living like this came with a profound emotional and philosophical price. Imagine never again feeling the natural wind on your bare skin, never again touching another person, without the constant mediation of technological layers. Imagine every hug being filtered by electronic sensors, every caress translated by cold algorithms, every kiss mediated by protective membranes. The colonists began to communicate more through touches on their suits than through spoken words. They developed a sophisticated tactile language that their machines translated into waves of pure emotion. They learned to love in a completely different way, to smile through biosensors that captured facial muscle contractions, to cry tears that were immediately recycled for hydration through microscopic capillary tubes, to have sex through the synchronization of neural frequencies where pleasure was shared digitally between connected nervous systems. Their children were born inside mobile incubators, extensions of the parental suits that protected them from conception until they were old enough for their own cocoons. They never knew the direct touch of human skin, only the constant mediation of maternal technology. It was high-quality survival, but it wasn't life as we knew it. It was a filtered, processed, translated existence. It was the brave first step on a journey that would take them far beyond what they ever imagined was possible for the human condition. Because on Mercury, adapting isn't a comfortable choice. It's an inevitability that transforms the very essence of what it means to be alive. And in the depths of their technology-protected hearts, something was whispering that this was only the beginning. Expanded. The second generation was not born dependent on suits. They were born different from anything Earth had ever produced, from anything that terrestrial evolution had ever even dreamed of creating. After decades of controlled exposure to relentless solar radiation, directed genetic modification, and extreme evolutionary pressure that would have wiped out any terrestrial species, human bodies began to respond to Mercury's impossible calls. Not through increasingly sophisticated external technology, but through accelerated biological evolution, a deep cellular metamorphosis that redesigned the very sacred definition of humanity, neuron by neuron, cell by cell. It was as if the planet were whispering instructions directly to human DNA, rewriting the genetic code through environmental pressures that functioned as a new form of hyper-fast natural selection. The alchemy of blood. Blood was the first system to transform radically in a metamorphosis that began almost imperceptibly but accelerated exponentially with each generation. The iron that ran through terrestrial veins, that red metal that had carried oxygen through billions of years of evolution, was gradually replaced by silicon and titanium compounds that neither boiled nor froze in the extreme Mercurian temperatures. The replacement process took 3 full generations. The first generation developed an increasing tolerance to thermal variations, but still partially relied on traditional iron. The second generation was born with approximately Dr. Yuki Tanaka-Chen, the first Mercurian hematologist, meticulously documented these transformations. She observed that the new blood not only transported nutrients, it functioned as an internal communication system, transmitting information about temperature, pressure, and radiation through microelectrical currents that flowed with the new metallic compounds. The veins became thicker and visibly more resilient, creating circulatory patterns that were simultaneously functional and artistically beautiful. Circulation became slower and more deliberate. What terrestrials would measure as the heart transformed into a stronger, more efficient biological machine, developing additional chambers specialized in filtering different types of solar radiation. It beat with a deep, hypnotic rhythm that echoed the planet's solar phases, automatically synchronizing with cosmic cycles. During solar storms, the heart rate accelerated. During periods of stellar calm, it slowed to conserve energy. The blood changed color completely, from terrestrial red to a luminescent metallic gold that reflected internal sunlight, creating a subtle glow that made bodies shine softly in the darkness of the Mercurian nights. When accidentally cut, they didn't bleed red. A golden liquid flowed out that instantly coagulated upon contact with air, forming metallic crystals that functioned as natural bandages. Even more fascinating, the new blood carried memories. Each blood cell functioned as a biological microprocessor, storing thermal experiences, information about solar radiation, and even fragments of emotional experiences. A blood transfusion not only saved lives, it transmitted memories, knowledge, and even personality traits. The respiratory revolution. Terrestrial lungs, those pink, spongy organs that had sustained human life for millions of years, slowly atrophied until they disappeared completely in a transformation that took only 2 generations. It was like watching evolution on cosmic fast-forward. In their place, extremely sophisticated subcutaneous biofilters developed that extracted oxygen directly from the minerals in contact with the transformed skin. Breathing became a constant and silent absorption through millions of specialized pores distributed throughout the body. They never again needed to breathe in the terrestrial sense, never again felt that primitive anxiety of lacking air. The process was visible to the naked eye. During periods of high activity, the skin developed a pattern of microscopic undulations, waves of absorption that moved across the body's surface like flowing water. It was hypnotic to watch. Geometric patterns that flowed across the skin, changing direction according to the concentration of minerals in the environment. Each specialized pore was a masterpiece of natural bioengineering. Microscopes revealed structures that looked like tiny, metallic flowers, silicon petals that opened and closed according to air quality, biological filters that separated oxygen from dozens of other toxic compounds present in Mercury's thin atmosphere. The biofilters also processed chemical information about the environment. They could detect the presence of solar storms hours before technological instruments registered any change, feel variations in the mineral composition of the soil through contact with their feet, and even identify other Mercurians through their unique chemical signatures. During the long Mercurian nights, when the temperature plummeted to levels that would crystallize any form of terrestrial life, the biofilters entered an active hibernation mode. They continued to function, but at a very reduced frequency, conserving energy while extracting the little oxygen available from the ice crystals that formed on the surface. The living armor of the skin. The skin metamorphosed into a multi-layered living shield that was simultaneously protection and a complex sensory organ. The transformation created different specializations in different parts of the body, an adaptation that made each Mercurian a unique biological work of art. The backs developed thick, reflective surfaces that changed color according to solar exposure, bright metallic gold during radiation peaks, matte silver during normal periods, deep blue during the night phases. These surfaces not only reflected dangerous radiation, they processed it, converting potentially lethal energy into usable heat for bodily functions. The arms and legs developed movable horny plates that opened and closed like conscious reptilian scales, but with much more sophistication. Each scale was individually controlled by the nervous system, allowing for precise thermal regulation down to specific degrees. It was possible to observe Mercurians playing their own scales like instruments, creating ventilation patterns that produced subtle sounds. A rudimentary form of body music. The wrists and ankles developed glass-like, translucent areas where the biofilters operated more intensely. These body windows allowed for direct observation of the internal systems, the golden flow of the new blood, the undulations of the biofilters, and even the neural microcurrents that controlled autonomous functions. The skin on the face became more sensitive than any terrestrial scientific instrument. It could detect temperature variations of tenths of a degree, changes in atmospheric pressure before any equipment registered them, and even subtle changes in planetary magnetic fields. Some Mercurians developed the ability to read the emotional state of others through micro-variations in facial skin temperature, a form of thermal empathy that transcended words. Even more impressive, the skin developed self-repair capabilities that bordered on the miraculous. Small cuts closed in minutes, superficial burns healed in hours, and even more significant damage was repaired in a few days through a process that involved the molecular reorganization of the skin's own structure. The multiplication of senses. Terrestrial eyes, those delicate organs that captured only a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum, multiplied and specialized in a transformation that completely redefined the concept of vision. In addition to the original pair, now vestigial and protected by special transparent membranes, new visual organs emerged in strategic locations on the body. On the temples, small eyes specialized in detecting ultraviolet radiation as colored waves, allowing them to literally see solar radiation as complex visual patterns that danced in the air. On the nape of the neck, visual organs emerged, adapted to see perfectly in the absolute darkness of the Mercurian night side. These night eyes captured residual infrared radiation and converted it into detailed images, creating a night vision that surpassed any terrestrial technology. During the long nights of 88 Earth days, when the planet became a sculpture of black crystal, these eyes revealed landscapes of a ghostly beauty. Crystallized plains that glowed with residual infrared light, craters that pulsed with deep geothermal heat. On the palms of the hands, microscopic visual organs developed that were specialized in capturing solar winds as dancing auroras in nearby space. When they extended their hands towards space, they could literally watch the charged particles of the solar wind flowing around the planet like invisible rivers of light. They developed a third row of eyes on their foreheads, small and specialized in detecting temperature variations as visual textures. They could literally watch waves of heat rising from the ground like golden rivers in the air, see the temperature difference between their own footprints and the surrounding soil, and even detect the presence of other life forms through their unique thermal signatures. The original eyes were not abandoned. They evolved to function as master eyes, coordinating and processing all the visual information from the specialized organs. The Mercurian brain developed new areas specifically dedicated to processing this massive amount of simultaneous visual information. The result was a visual perception that made the terrestrial experience almost blind by comparison. They saw in multiple spectrums simultaneously, perceived depth and distance in ways that transcended Euclidean geometry, and detected movements and changes that occurred on temporal scales, ranging from microseconds to years. Reinvented body architecture. They became physically short and wide, an adaptation that optimized survival in environments of variable gravity. The average height decreased to approximately, the bones became denser and more flexible simultaneously, a biological contradiction that defied terrestrial science. They incorporated silicon and titanium minerals that made them virtually unbreakable, but maintained a flexibility that allowed adaptation to the extreme gravitational variations between the planet's sides. During the daytime, when the thermal expansion of the underground minerals subtly altered local gravity, their bones adjusted automatically. They developed extra limbs, rudimentary arms that grew from their ribs, perfect for navigating complex three-dimensional environments. These additional arms were thinner than the primary ones, specialized in precision tasks and balance. They could extend or retract as needed, were articulated in multiple directions, and had a tactile sensitivity that surpassed even the original human fingers. Their feet elongated and adapted drastically, becoming almost prehensile and highly specialized. They could grip heated metallic surfaces without suffering damage, detect seismic vibrations through specialized receptors on the soles, and even feel the mineral composition of the soil through specialized chemoreceptors. Each foot developed a kind of magnetic pad, a concentration of cells sensitive to magnetic fields that allowed for precise navigation using underground iron deposits. It was like having biological compasses in their feet, always pointing to the most intense magnetic fields that indicated safe directions of movement. Their hands evolved to have telescopic fingers that could extend up to 3 times their normal length, perfect for reaching into tight crevices or manipulating delicate components at a distance. They built cities that followed Mercury's own movement, magnificent mobile structures that migrated eternally in the twilight zone, on the delicate border between the day that kills and the night that freezes, in a perpetual dance with survival. Imagine waking up every day knowing that your city has to move, not by choice, not for convenience, but because standing still means instant death. The Mercurian cities were living urban organisms, architectural creatures that breathed, adapted, and migrated, following the thin line where the temperature remained between the deadly extremes. The main city, known as Perpetua, was a marvel of urban bioengineering. Built on thousands of articulated legs that functioned as mobile routes, it moved at a constant hypnotic speed. About individual dwellings were truly living architectural organisms, walls that intelligently contracted to conserve heat during crossings closer to the night zone, ceilings that expanded like gigantic lungs to absorb controlled sunlight during passages closer to the dayside. There were no windows as we know them on Earth, only translucent biosynthetic membranes that filtered and translated the external environment into safe and understandable sensations for their transformed bodies. Each house had what they called a thermal heart, a central chamber that functioned as a domestic circulatory system, pumping thermoregulatory fluids through veins of liquid metal that ran through all the walls. These veins visibly pulsed, creating hypnotic patterns of golden light that moved across the surfaces like rivers of living energy. The houses literally breathed. Each dwelling had microscopic pores in the walls that opened and closed according to the need for thermal exchange. During the hottest phases, the pores dilated, allowing excess heat to escape in visible whispers. During the colder phases, they contracted, creating a hermetic and heated internal environment. Even more fascinating, the dwellings reacted emotionally to their inhabitants. Through biometric sensors integrated into the floor, the houses detected the emotional state of those living in them, expanding when they sensed joy, protectively contracting when they detected fear or sadness, creating intimate and cozy niches when they perceived a need for contemplation. Jane. The heating and cooling system was a biological work of art. Each dwelling had microscopic symbiotic creatures that lived in the walls, organisms that absorbed excess heat during the day and gradually released it at night. These creatures created luminous patterns on the walls, like domestic constellations that changed color according to the temperature. Gold when heating, silvery blue when cooling, soft green when in perfect balance. Eating became a completely new and almost spiritual ritual that transcended any terrestrial concept of nutrition. They didn't eat in the sense we know, they absorbed. Their meals were composed of rare minerals extracted from the deepest craters of the planet, multicolored crystals that slowly melted in the mouth and released concentrated nutrients for entire days. The food harvest process was a community expedition that happened every Mercurian lunar cycle. Specialized groups, known as nutrient prospectors, descended into the depths of the craters using special suits that allowed them to withstand even more extreme temperatures. They searched for specific mineral veins, iron-magnesium crystals for muscle strength, silicon-calcium deposits for bone renewal, rare cobalt-zinc crystals for mental clarity. Each nutritional crystal had a specific color, texture, and flavor. The energy crystals were golden and crackled on the tongue like small bolts of lightning. The recovery crystals were translucent blue and dissolved like cold snow, releasing a sensation of cellular renewal. The concentration crystals were deep red and created a slight mental hum when absorbed. But the true food revolution was the development of solar feeding. Some Mercurians evolved the extraordinary ability to feed directly on solar radiation through specialized cells in their skin, becoming literally creatures of starlight. This process was called conscious photosynthesis. The moment of solar feeding was sacred and communal. At the Mercurian dawn, which happened only once every 88 Earth days, the entire community gathered in specific formations on the terraces of the mobile cities. It was a spectacle of biological synchronization, hundreds of people simultaneously opening their specialized pores like flowers turning towards the sun. The absorption was accompanied by a collective hum, a harmonic frequency that still resonates in audio records, a vibration that seemed to connect each individual to the very pulsating heart of the star. During these moments, their skin glowed with a golden luminescence, creating a sea of human lights that could be seen for miles. Different people absorbed different spectrums of sunlight. The youngest preferred the high-energy ultraviolet rays, which gave them vitality and physical strength. The oldest specialized in low-frequency infrared rays, which promoted contemplation and wisdom. Some rare individuals managed to absorb the entire solar spectrum, becoming true star collectors, beings that constantly shone with a soft internal light. Movement across the planet happened in elegant magnetic leaps, a form of locomotion that transformed displacement into art. Using the residual iron fields in the Mercurian soil, they propelled themselves in low, controlled arcs, flying in graceful trajectories that seemed to defy gravity. Each Mercurian developed their own style of magnetic leaping. Some preferred short, frequent jumps, creating a movement pattern that resembled a punctuated dance. Others specialized in long, high leaps, gliding for hundreds of yards in a single impulse. The most artistic created complex sequences of leaps that told stories through movement, a form of aerial dance that was simultaneously transport and artistic expression. Children learned to leap before they learned to walk. They were equipped with small magnetic amplifiers that allowed them to make safe, controlled leaps from a very young age. Watching a group of Mercurian children playing was like observing a symphony of three-dimensional movement. Small beings leaping in complex formations, creating patterns in the air that were constantly changing. Their journeys were carefully planned according to the extreme solar cycles. During the torturous day, when the surface temperature could melt lead, They took refuge in caves of liquid metal, sleeping in thermal cocoons that kept them in safe, suspended animation. During the freezing night, when the temperature plummeted they developed a fascinating form of collective transport: biological trains. Long, articulated creatures that grew as needed, connecting magnetically to each other. These vehicle creatures were hybrids of technology and biology, with multiple layers of thermal protection and capable of transporting hundreds of people through the impossible territories. A typical biological train was composed of the train creatures were conscious. They had a rudimentary intelligence that allowed them to navigate autonomously, make decisions about routes, and even split into smaller groups when necessary. They communicated with each other through subsonic vibrations, creating a transport network that functioned as a single organism distributed across the planet. Mercurian communication evolved into something that completely transcended terrestrial language. They developed multiple forms of expression that operated simultaneously, creating a rich and multidimensional communication. Primary communication happened through subsonic frequencies, deep vibrations that propagated through the solid ground. This planetary speech allowed conversations across miles of distance. Each individual had a unique seismic signature, a specific pattern of vibrations that functioned as their name, identity, and personal biography all at once. Intimate conversations took place through subsonic harmony, when two people synchronized their frequencies, creating interference waves that generated new vibrational patterns. It was possible to hear these conversations through their feet, feeling the vibrations as a complex music that carried deep emotional meaning. But perhaps even more beautiful was the language of colors through the skin. When emotional, their skin changed hue: brilliant gold for intense joy, soft silver for deep contemplation, deep blue for longing, copper red for passion, emerald green for serenity. Intimate conversations happened through dances of colors on the skin, a visual communication that was simultaneously art and dialogue. Couples developed unique chromatic languages, specific combinations of colors that only they understood. A couple could talk about intimate matters through subtle changes in skin pigmentation, creating visual messages that were invisible to external observers. Collective communication happened through memory transmission, the extraordinary ability to share complete experiences through touch. It wasn't just words or concepts, but entire lived experiences, pure emotions, knowledge that never needed translation. A conversation was a temporal exchange of consciousnesses, a fusion of perspectives that lasted seconds, but contained years of meaning. During community assemblies, when the entire population needed to discuss important issues, they formed memory circles, structures where hundreds of people physically connected, creating a temporary neural network. Information, experiences, and perspectives flowed through this network like currents of consciousness, allowing decisions to be made based on the totality of the collective experience. Mercurian social life was organized around rituals that were strange and deeply beautiful. During the rare solar eclipses, when one of Mercury's moons passed between the planet and the sun, the entire community gathered for the seismic song. It was a moment where everyone sang simultaneously in subsonic frequencies, creating harmonies that made the craters resonate like gigantic instruments. The resulting sound was impossible to describe with terrestrial words. It was a music you felt through your bones, a harmony that vibrated in the soul. The craters functioned as natural amplifiers, each tuned to a specific frequency according to its size and depth. During the seismic song, the entire planet became a single cosmic musical instrument. They celebrated not births or deaths, but transformations. Each significant physical change was honored as a sacred step closer to Mercurian perfection. When someone developed a new organ or ability, the entire community participated in a recognition ritual, where the new skill was tested, celebrated, and integrated into the collective experience. Mating rituals were ceremonies of biological synchronization that could last for weeks. Couples isolated themselves in special chambers where they underwent a process of total harmonization, synchronizing not only emotions and thoughts, but also metabolic cycles, brain frequencies, and even the rhythms of solar absorption. Work, as a concept, practically disappeared. Instead of specific jobs, Mercurians specialized in functions of existence, activities that naturally contributed to the collective well-being. Some became crater readers, experts in interpreting the planet's geological history through the analysis of rock formations. Others specialized as temperature harmonizers, individuals who helped regulate the internal climate of the mobile cities. The most revered professions were the star translators, individuals with a special ability to interpret variations in solar radiation and predict planetary climate changes. They spent long periods in solar meditation, absorbing information directly from stellar energy and translating it into useful knowledge for the community. Children's education happened through total experiential immersion. From birth, they were gradually exposed to all Mercurian conditions, developing resistance and abilities naturally and progressively. There were no schools in the traditional sense. The entire planet was a classroom. Every situation was an opportunity for learning. The long nights of 88, Earth days became periods of great introspection, when the silence was absolute and the cold transformed the planet into a cosmic crystal sculpture. They practiced cosmic meditation, a state of consciousness where the mind expanded to feel not only the pulse of Mercury, but the gravitational rhythm of the entire solar system, connecting to the heartbeats of distant planets. During these collective meditations, entire groups entered states of expanded consciousness where they could perceive the music of the spheres, the gravitational vibrations created by the movement of the planets in their orbits. It was described as hearing a cosmic symphony, where each world contributed its own note to the universal harmony. They lived slowly, thought slowly, loved slowly. Because on Mercury, hurry was a concept that belonged to another world, to other lives, to other species that had not yet learned to dance with cosmic time. Their relationships developed over decades. What terrestrials would call a first date could last an entire solar cycle, 88 Earth days of gradual acquaintance, subtle synchronization, progressive harmonization. Love wasn't an explosion of passion, but a slow and inevitable convergence of two existences that discovered cosmic affinity. And in every moment of this impossible life, in every breath through biofilters, in every magnetic leap across the crystallized planes, in every absorption of sunlight through the modified skin, they were writing a new definition of what it means to be alive in a universe that constantly invites transcendence. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments, would you live on Mercury? What city are you watching this documentary from? Let's chat in the comments. But there was a silence that haunted them like a persistent, melancholic ghost. In the deepest moments of the Mercurian nights, when the entire planet became a cosmic mausoleum of ice and metal, when even the solar winds stopped blowing and the universe seemed to hold its breath, something echoed in the transformed minds of the colonists, a phantom memory of something they once were but could no longer name, understand, or fully embrace. It was like trying to remember a dream that slips through your fingers the moment you wake up, a nostalgia without an object, a longing without direction. They vaguely remembered a color they used to call blue, a hue that their terrestrial minds associated with vastness, serenity, and infinite hope. But now, when they tried to evoke that color through their new, expanded visual spectrums, it made no sense at all. It was like trying to explain music to someone born deaf, or describing light to someone who had always lived in absolute darkness. They fragmentarily remembered a delicate sensation on the skin that happened when something ethereal called breeze touched them gently, a movement of air that carried the scents of flowers, the dampness of lakes, the promises of changing seasons. But their modified nerves could no longer process that subtle information. Their nerve endings were calibrated to detect temperature variations of hundreds of degrees, brutal pressure changes, lethal radiation. Delicacy had been lost in the adaptation. They had distant and disturbing echoes of experiences involving tears, a salty, warm liquid that escaped from the eyes during moments of intense emotion, be it sadness, joy, relief, or contemplation. They knew it happened. They knew it was important, but their new eyes no longer produced this ancestral fluid. When they felt what they used to call intense emotion, their pupils dilated and contracted rhythmically, but nothing moist escaped. Water had become too precious to waste on feelings. The terrestrial concept of longing became a specific Mercurian neurological dysfunction, a catalogued medical condition that mainly affected the older colonists, those who still held fragments of terrestrial memories in some preserved corner of their consciousness. The afflicted spent long hours desperately trying to reconstitute sensations that their transformed bodies could no longer offer. Dr. Elena Vasquez-Chen was one of the first to document this syndrome. She herself suffered episodes where she became obsessed with trying to remember what it was like to feel true hunger, that sensation of emptiness in the stomach that craved specific food, not just nutrients. She would spend entire days trying to recreate the memory of biting into a crisp apple, feeling the sweet juice run down her chin, but her biofilters could only process suspended minerals. Other first-generation colonists developed strange and touching obsessions. Marcus Rodriguez Kim would spend hours observing the craters, trying to remember what thirst was, not the technical need for hydration that their systems automatically monitored, but that specific urgency, that feeling of dryness in the throat that only fresh water could satisfy. Sarah Thompson Okafor developed a fixation with the concept of running freely. Her new muscles were perfect for controlled magnetic navigation, but she felt a phantom nostalgia for a form of movement that was inefficient, energy-wasting, but brought a sensation she couldn't name. Joy, freedom, life. The words no longer existed in her new vocabulary. They developed a specific syndrome called blue memory syndrome, a progressive melancholic state where the afflicted became obsessed with the abstract idea of a sky that changed color, of water that moved without energetic purpose, of plants that grew toward the light, not to survive, but from some kind of primitive instinct they could no longer understand. Symptoms included periods of catatonic contemplation, where the individual remained motionless for hours, desperately trying to process concepts like passing clouds, wind in the leaves, rain that falls for pleasure and not out of necessity. Some developed a compulsion to touch random surfaces, as if searching for a specific texture they could no longer define. The younger generation did not suffer from these nostalgic dysfunctions. They were born pure Mercurians, without terrestrial emotional baggage, and for them, Earth was an incomprehensible legend, a mythical world where biologically fragile creatures lived exposed to atmospheric poisons like pure oxygen and unfiltered water. Terrestrial stories sounded to them like fairy tales about beings who could exist without thermal protection, who survived in constant temperatures, who breathed toxic gases directly from the environment. When the elders tried to explain concepts like cool wind on your face or warm sun on your skin, the Mercurian children listened with the same expression as someone hearing stories about dragons or unicorns. It was mythology, not memory. Love became fundamentally different, operating on frequencies that completely transcended the traditional human experience. Without the ability to exchange bodily fluids, without the direct touch of bare skin, without the organic synchronization of heartbeats, they created new forms of intimacy that were simultaneously more intense and more distant than any terrestrial experience. The act of love became a deep, energetic connection where two beings consciously synchronized their internal systems, sharing body heat, absorbed light frequencies, and neural waves in a dance that could last for entire days. It was more powerful than any terrestrial experience, creating bonds that transcended the physical and touched directly the essence of consciousness. But it was also more ethereal, less animal, less human. Couples developed an intimate language of body temperature changes. A 2-degree increase in the palm of the hand meant, "I miss you." A gradual decrease in the temperature of the neck communicated, "I need space." Love became a conversation in biological thermostats. Some fundamentally human emotions simply disappeared from the Mercurian repertoire, evaporating like water in the sun. Hurry became an incomprehensible concept. How could one be in a hurry in a world where time is measured in planetary rotations that last for Earth months? Anxiety completely lost its meaning when every physical need was automatically supplied by the bodily systems before the mind even registered the lack. The fear of the dark dissolved when darkness became just another natural state of existence, as familiar as light. In fact, many Mercurians developed a preference for the night phase, when the planet became a silent crystal and they could meditate, connected to the deep seismic vibrations. But new emotions emerged to fill the spaces left by the old ones. Solaris, a specific and addictive euphoria caused by the direct absorption of sunlight through specialized pores. It was a chemical happiness, a drunkenness of photons that could last for weeks after an intense exposure. Some Mercurians became addicted to Solaris, constantly seeking out areas of greater solar exposure. Crater melancholy, a deep philosophical contemplation that arose automatically when they observed the planet's ancient circular wounds. Each crater told a story of impact, of cosmic violence, of planetary survival. The Mercurians developed the ability to read these stories directly, feeling the age of the impacts, the speed of the meteorites, the chemical composition of the projectiles that created each mark. It was an educational melancholy, a sadness that brought knowledge, orbital ecstasy, a rare transcendent state that happened when their internal rhythms perfectly synchronized with the Mercurian rotation. In these moments, individuals temporarily felt like a conscious extension of the planet itself, experiencing Mercury's cosmic perspective in its dance around the sun. It was described as temporarily becoming a world. And then the question that echoed through the generations, like a disturbing existential mantra, emerged. If we don't feel like humans, if we don't think like humans, if we don't love like humans, if we don't fear like humans, what are we really? Where does evolution end and extinction begin? At what point does a species stop being itself to become something completely new? Some Mercurians responded philosophically that they were the next inevitable phase of conscious evolution. Others whispered melancholically that they were technological ghosts of a species that had died silently while trying to transcend its biological limits. But most simply continued to exist, dancing harmoniously with Mercury, with no urgent need for definitions or labels. The answer might come in the form of another question, even deeper and more liberating. Perhaps being human was never really about the specific body we inhabit or the particular emotions we feel, but about this infinite and inexplicable courage to inhabit the impossible, to transform ourselves when transformation is the only way to continue existing consciously in the universe. And in that fundamental courage, in that refusal to accept limitations as definitive, they remained profoundly, eternally, and unquestionably human, perhaps even more human than they had ever been on Earth. From the ashes of terrestrial humanity, something completely unprecedented in the known universe was born, a civilization that did not brutally fight against its hostile environment, but danced harmoniously with it in an eternal cosmic symphony that transformed survival into pure art. They developed forms of artistic expression that completely transcended terrestrial concepts of creativity. Their main art was based on the conscious and delicate manipulation of magnetic fields, invisible sculptures that could only be felt through their modified senses, ethereal creations that existed as pure energy waves in space, shaping the very electromagnetic structure of the environment. A Mercurian artist named Zara 7, names had evolved to reflect generations of birth, created a masterpiece known as Memory of the Iron. It was a magnetic installation that stretched for square miles, using the natural iron deposits in the soil to create energy currents that told Mercury's geological history. Visitors could walk through the work for weeks, feeling through their body senses each planetary era, each meteor impact, each change in the solar orbit. Their symphonies were composed of micrometric variations in the soil temperature, thermal melodies that extended for miles, and could be heard through their feet during contemplative walks that lasted for entire solar cycles. The composer, Kyle. Their paintings were complex radiation patterns that took entire weeks to be fully read, visual stories that unfolded as the observer moved through three-dimensional space. They created heat galleries, spaces where different temperatures were organized like colors on an infinite palette, allowing for aesthetic experiences through pure thermoperception. A famous gallery, curated by the artist Nova 9, featured a permanent exhibition called Gradients of the Soul. These were chambers where the temperature varied in micro-degrees, creating thermal landscapes that evoked specific emotions. A room heated to exactly literature was completely transformed into the direct transmission of neural experience. Their novels were elaborate sets of artificial memories that could be downloaded and experienced as complete, temporary realities. A reader did not read about a journey, they temporarily lived the journey, experiencing every sensation, every thought, every discovery of the protagonist. The author, Dex. Poetry was created through the synchronization of brain frequencies, where multiple authors contributed simultaneously to create collective works of pure consciousness. They were no longer words organized into verses, but shared emotional states that could be experienced directly. The poetic movement, deep resonance, led by a collective of 12 consciousnesses that identified as wave perpetua, created poems that were literally harmonious brain frequencies. Their most famous works included Symphony of Cosmic Solitude and Variations on the Temperature of the Soul, experiences that left participants emotionally transformed for days. Mercurian politics evolved into something that completely transcended terrestrial concepts of government, based not on conflict, debate, or competition, but on absolute resonant harmony. Decisions were made through collective synchronization. The entire community voluntarily entered deep mental resonance until a solution emerged naturally from neurological consensus. The process was almost ritualistic. When a community problem arose, they gathered in tuning circles in specially prepared locations, modified craters that naturally amplified brain frequencies. They connected their nervous systems in a temporary and delicate network, creating a temporary, collective superconsciousness. The solution was not debated, argued, or imposed. It was felt, emerging as a shared truth that everyone instantly recognized. It was politics through collective intuition, democracy through neural synchronization. There were no winners or losers, just different perspectives harmonizing into a higher synthesis. The most famous case was the Great Migration decision, when the entire population had to choose whether to follow the temperate zones or establish permanent colonies at the poles. For 3 solar cycles, the entire community remained in synchronization, collectively exploring all possibilities, feeling the consequences of each choice. The final decision, a spiral migration that allowed different groups to follow their affinities, emerged as an obvious truth that no one needed to justify. They created a new form of spirituality they called planetary communion, the reverent worship of cosmic movement. They venerated not distant, anthropomorphic gods or supernatural entities, but the observable cycles of Mercury, the eternal ballet between temperature and time, light and shadow, survival and cosmic transcendence. Their temples were sophisticated seismic observatories where they heard the prayers of the planet itself, interpreting microscopic tremors as divine messages, vibrations as spiritual guidance. The main temple, built in the center of Mercury's largest crater, could detect seismic vibrations so subtle that they registered the impact of cosmic dust grains on the distant surface. The high priestess known as Echo. They developed planetary communion rituals where the entire community breathed in sync with Mercury's thermal tides. During these sacred moments, the boundary between individual consciousness and planetary consciousness dissolved completely. They temporarily became conscious and collaborative parts of a larger planetary organism. The most important ritual was the Great Synchronization, which happened once every Mercurian year. The entire population positioned themselves at specific points on the surface, creating a network of consciousnesses that covered the whole planet. For 7 participants, described the experience as temporarily becoming the planet. They felt Mercury's rotation as their own body movement, perceived the sun as a source of internal energy, and experienced the solar winds as sensations on the planetary skin. It was a mystical experience that completely redefined the relationship between individual and cosmos. Education was radically transformed into the direct transmission of experience accumulated through generations. Children learned through the temporary and carefully controlled fusion with the elders, absorbing decades of practical knowledge in sessions that lasted for entire solar cycles. There were no more physical books or traditional schools, just the living and pulsating library of the species' collective memories. The educational process began at birth. Babies were gently connected to the collective memory systems, receiving basic information about survival, navigation, and communication. As they grew, they chose specific areas of interest and deepened their knowledge through more intense connections with experts. At 12 Mercurian years old, approximately knowledge became fluid, transmissible, and shareable as a community resource. An individual discovery instantly spread through the community like ripples in a cosmic pond. Ignorance became practically impossible when all accumulated wisdom was always available through voluntary neural connection. They developed a unique and complex philosophy they called evolutionary Mercurianism, the deep belief that conscious life does not exist to perpetuate itself indefinitely in the same form, but to continuously transform itself towards higher levels of complexity and consciousness. For them, evolution was not a casual biological accident, but a form of intentional cosmic art. Each mutation was seen as a work of universal creativity, each transformation as a verse in the infinite poetry of conscious existence. Resisting evolution was considered a form of cosmic blasphemy. Their children were something that completely transcended any expectation based on previous human experience. They were born already naturally attuned to planetary frequencies, with organs that their parents didn't even possess, with abilities that made each generation less recognizable as human and more something else. The 4th generation developed the extraordinary ability to communicate directly with Mercury's iron core, receiving detailed information about the planet's geological history, changes in the magnetic field, and even predictions about future solar activity. They became living planetary oracles. The fifth generation began to show intriguing signs of telepathic connection with Jupiter's moons, millions of miles away. During certain planetary conjunctions, these children entered trance states and described in detail landscapes that would only be discovered by space probes decades later. The sixth generation was born with the disturbing ability to perceive distant black holes as familiar and comforting presences. They pointed to certain regions of space and claimed to be able to feel the gravity of objects that even the most advanced telescopes could not detect. The seventh generation, still in development, showed signs of abilities that Mercurian scientists could not even categorize, a kind of expanded cosmic consciousness that seemed to operate on completely alien scales of time and space. They completely stopped looking at the stars as distant destinations for conquest and began to see them as cosmic seeds, places where other impossibilities were waiting patiently to flourish, where other forms of consciousness were waiting to emerge. Their next collective dream was no longer to explore or colonize other worlds, but to become conscious bridges between them, cosmic facilitators who help different life forms connect across the vast distances of space. In the eternal silence that separates day from night on Mercury, in the suspended moment between the fire that kills and the ice that preserves, there is a truth that echoes throughout the infinite cosmos like a musical note that never finishes resonating. We were not made just to survive the challenges we face. We were made to eternally reinvent ourselves, to transcend every limitation we thought was definitive, to dance with the impossible until it becomes not only possible, but inevitable. The species that once looked at Earth's night sky and timidly dreamed of the distant stars was not the same one that now danced harmoniously with Mercury's solar winds, synchronized with the heartbeats of the iron core of the planet closest to the Sun. But perhaps this radical transformation was not a painful loss of our essential humanity. Perhaps it was a glorious revelation of what we were always destined to become. Mercury has a diameter of, see how complex this planet is in its apparent simplicity, how challenging it is in its proximity to our star. Now imagine the infinite magnitude of God, who created this small world of extremes, and yet left his most precious cosmic signature here on our even smaller and more fragile blue planet, sending his Son to live among us, to save us from sin and the eternal separation that distanced us from the divine. Purpose. If Mercury, with all its hostility and deadly challenges, could become home to transformed consciousness, imagine what God can do with us, in us, and through us, when we surrender our limitations to his infinite possibilities. In every impossible world we choose to inhabit with courage and faith, we leave behind a limited and self-sabotaging version of ourselves and discover a new facet of divine creation, a new expression of the potential that God planted in us from the beginning. In every environment that seemed specifically created to destroy us, we find a sacred opportunity to recreate ourselves in the image of the Creator, beings infinitely capable of transformation, adaptation, and transcendence. The Mercurians did not conquer their planet through brute force or technological domination. They were conquered by it through loving surrender, through the willingness to allow themselves to be shaped by circumstances that seemed impossible. And in that total surrender, in that willingness to die to what they were to be born as something new, they discovered something that no terrestrial technology could ever offer: the absolute freedom to become completely other, completely new, completely impossible according to old and limited standards. This is the same freedom that God offers to each of us, the freedom to become more than we thought was possible, the freedom to inhabit dreams that seem too big for our current capabilities, the freedom to continuously transform ourselves toward the eternal purpose that He planted in our hearts. This means that you, who are watching this documentary now, in this precise moment in time and space, are infinitely more valuable than this entire planet, with its extreme temperatures and deadly challenges. You were created not just to survive the circumstances you encounter, but to transcend them, not just to exist, but to eternally transform yourself toward the divine perfection that is your destiny. You are more valuable than all the molten gold on Mercury's plains, more precious than all the iron crystals in its gigantic core, more important to the cosmos than all the solar storms that sweep its hostile surface. Mercury orbits the Sun at an average distance of perhaps Mercury will never be a home in the physical sense we know on Earth, with its mild temperatures and breathable atmosphere. But the burning desire to inhabit it, to transform the impossible into the possible, has already taken us far beyond the limited definitions we once accepted about ourselves, beyond the self-imposed limitations we mistook for reality, beyond the very restrictive concept of a fixed and unchanging humanity. And if we look at the stars today with eyes renewed by faith and hope, we will no longer see unattainable destinations or impossible dreams that make us feel small and inadequate. We will see sacred laboratories where future versions of ourselves are waiting patiently to be born, to grow, and to flourish. We will see divine invitations to become more than we are. We will see opportunities to dance with the impossible until it bows before our persistent faith. Because the impossible, we discovered with growing joy and unwavering faith, was never an insurmountable wall built to limit us. It was always a divine invitation, a disguised door, a loving test for us to discover what we are really made of when we decide to trust in the Creator who made us to transcend, not to conform. Every extreme of Mercury, the heat that melts metal, the cold that crystallizes gases, the radiation that should destroy all life, became an opportunity for consciousness to reinvent itself. Every impossibility was transformed into a possibility when approached with courage, creativity, and faith in life's infinite potential. In the same way, every challenge in your life, every circumstance that seems created to limit you, every impossible you face, is a disguised opportunity for you to discover a stronger, wiser, more transcendent version of who you are. The Mercurians learned to absorb sunlight through their skin. You can learn to absorb divine hope through faith. They developed the ability to communicate through planetary frequencies. You can develop the ability to communicate with God Himself through persistent prayer. They became conscious bridges between impossible worlds. You can become a conscious bridge between heaven and earth, between the divine and the human, between what is and what can be. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah. This promise was not made just for special people or for specific moments. It was made for you now, in this moment, when you are discovering that it is possible to live in impossible worlds, when you allow yourself to be transformed by them, instead of trying to dominate them through force. If you have come this far on this extraordinary journey through Mercury and human transcendence, receive this special blessing that echoes through the cosmos. You are a jewel more precious than any star or planet in the infinite universe. You carry within you the potential to inhabit any impossibility that God places before you. Write B. Amani. Your name and your city in the comments. We will be praying specifically for you that God may pour out immeasurable blessings upon your life, opening up impossible possibilities in every area of your existence, transforming every challenge into an opportunity, every limitation into a springboard for transcendence. May you discover that you were made for so much more than just to survive. You were made to dance with the stars, to inhabit God's dreams, to become a living proof that the impossible is just another name for hasn't happened yet. The universe is waiting to see who you will become when you stop limiting yourself to what you think is possible. Mercury is calling, but God is whispering something even greater in your ear. The sound of Mercury's seismic frequencies slowly echoes, mixing with celestial harmonies until only the silent presence of eternity remains.